Labdien, good afternoon. It is my privilege to warmly welcome our four panelists, the audience present here, and also the online viewers of today's discussion, Restoring Justice for Ukraine. For those who have not had the pleasure of meeting before, my name is Diskusija, and I'm the Deputy Head of Mission of the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Latvia. As our former Prime Minister stated in his farewell speech earlier this week, this summer it will be 10 years ago since flight MH17 was brought down over eastern Ukraine by Russian-controlled forces. In the aftermath, the Netherlands was reminded, more than ever, of the importance of working together for justice and accountability. The Prime Minister emphasized that together you are stronger than alone. With a war raging in Europe, this thought should motivate us to continue our support for Ukraine, for peace there and for security here. More than 2 years have passed since Russia's unprovoked and illegal full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Since then, the war has inflicted widespread suffering and death. It has also resulted in the extensive destruction of property, of residential buildings and critical infrastructure, causing immense economic and personal losses. Beyond the physical devastation, there is the intangible, undocumented suffering inflicted daily on the minds and hearts of the Ukrainian people. Today, our discussion will focus on a pivotal international effort to restore justice, the Register of Damage. Launched in April of this year, the Register represents a significant step towards a mechanism that will ensure justice and compensation for Ukraine and its people. Both Latvia and the Netherlands are founding members of the Register and are actively involved in its work. Of course, the road ahead is not an easy one. Today, we therefore have a very experienced panel that will shed some light on this topic. We are honored to bring together Dutch, Latvian experts and experts from the Register itself, who will share with us their views on why the Register was established, how it works, and what it will bring in the future to ensure full and effective reparation. Let me conclude by thanking our wonderful team at the Embassy for making today's discussion happen. And I would also like to express our gratitude to the organizers of LAMPA for facilitating today's discussion, as well as congratulate you with your 10th Jubilee. Before our very experienced moderator, Guy Tamelins, will take over, I would first like to warmly welcome to the stage His Excellency Anatoly Kutsevol, Ambassador of Ukraine to Latvia, for his opening remarks. And I would like to wish you all a very interesting and fruitful discussion. Paldies. Ambassador, please, the floor is yours.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists, dear guests and live viewers, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me start by thanking Embassy of Kingdom of Netherlands for organizing this magnificent event at LAMPA. It's very important, and I do believe the key panel is here right now at this moment. And I guess the most important is that we don't lose the pace which we started quite a long period of time ago, and we still have to do a lot of things to achieve results. Let me probably start with the most important and to underline that unprovoked and brutal aggression of Russia against Ukraine has caused immense destruction and suffering. Once again, it's suffering, because every day people's lives and hopes, residential buildings and hospitals, schools, universities, energy facilities, other civilian objects are being destroyed. Every time when you destroy everything, you destroy the whole life, generations. As of end of 2023 alone, the recovery and reconstruction needs of Ukraine were estimated almost $486 billion. But believe me, it's a rough estimation, and about estimation which has been done on controlled territory of Ukraine. So if you could think about the uncontrolled territory of Ukraine, you at least will double this amount. It's about billions in future to understand. But what is priceless? So you cannot count how many damages this war and an aggression caused to ordinary lives of people. So lost jobs, generations. Cannot be counted as a building. So it's totally another story behind this. It's not safe to say that today the needs have so far exceeded $500 billion and continue to grow daily. I do believe that we need to understand it in more global context. The human cost is also struggling with 14.6 million people, about 40% of Ukraine's population. All those are in need of humanitarian assistance only this year, just to understand the volume of the problem. Every day more and more people in Ukraine lose their homes and livelihoods by Russian shells. Missiles and bombs forced on the street with nothing. The most important to understand with nothing. And lovely Latvia welcomed more than 50,000 Ukrainians here who found a new place to live, and I'm really grateful that at least some part of Ukrainians found their livelihood here. I'm really grateful to Latvian authorities for this. But Russia also do not give up by its systematic intentional efforts to destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure. We had a quite difficult 2022. We restored the energy infrastructure which has been destroyed by Russia. We thought that it's enough with the necessary systems to cover the energy infrastructure, but recent 8 months showed a totally different story. And we lost almost 50% of our energy generation. And it's also a new type of problem for Ukrainians. How to have enough energy, heat, water at your houses. This is also about survival. And all those damages, they scale up $56.6 billion US dollars, just to understand the margins. And also not about the money, it's about time. Just to construct one generation, no matter which one, you would need to start about the project cycle, and it will give you like from 1 year to 10 years perspective. So it's totally about not money, it's also about time. So Russia keeps doing it, unfortunately. As the key question is why? Because we are not giving actually enough pressure, we are not giving enough sanctions. We probably should be more focused on preventing exports and imports with Russia, no matter what it costs us. We cannot wait until the end of the war. Every moment counts, and people would like to come back. There's a lot of Ukrainians who are living currently abroad, but they are also missing this understanding of peace, understanding of patience, and understanding where to live, and where the infrastructure would allow us to do so. But all of them are also looking for justice, and this is a key word which we are going to discuss, and real justice for all of us. I would like to end this opening remarks by thanking the Latvian authorities for all support which has been provided to Ukrainians so far. And I also would like to especially thank all our partners, including Netherlands, for having this possibility to create our register of damages. This is one step forward. There are a lot of steps more to come, but for us, it's very important that by the end people understand that there will be justice, and justice in imminent, including MH17. Thank you so much. I would like to wish all of you panelists to have a fruitful discussion, and all our viewers online to have a lot of possibilities to discover this matter more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for the introductory remarks from the Embassy of Netherlands and the Embassy of Ukraine. My name is Gin Samuoliņš, International Affairs Editor at Latvian Public Television. Before we go on further with a discussion and conversation, and I introduce the speakers here, a couple of technical notes. One is that this discussion is going to be in English, and if you want translation into Latvian, then there would be headphones there. Šī diskusija un saruna notiks angļu valodā, un ja jūs vēlties ir tulkojums no angļu uz latviešu valodas, tas tiks nodrošināts auftiņās. Lūk, meitene ar zilo cepuri, tur var dabūt auftiņas, un auftiņās būs tulkojums latviski. Arī dzan. The next thing is the questions. Further down the road, you'll be able to ask the questions. Also, those watching the conversation over the internet, over Slido. My understanding there's a QR code or something like that where you can download or where you can ask a question on the Slido, and the same goes for those watching on the internet. So we have very esteemed experts here. I'm going to briefly introduce them, and then there's going to be a short movie which I'm going to ask to show later. Just briefly introduction. On my right is Miss Kristīna Līce. She is the advisor to the President of the Republic of Latvia on legislation and international law. Then next is Mr. Markian Klučkovski, who is the Executive Director of the Register for the Damage for Ukraine, which started its operation a couple of months, 2-3 months ago. And to the very right of me is Mr. Roland Becker, who works at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands for the Ukrainian accountability team, with a great experience, and currently advises how to move forward issues related to Ukraine and how to bring justice. Now we would like to present a short movie on the crimes of the Russian Federation, which has been done in Ukraine. Please.
Я Оля, українка, і я побачила війну ще у 2014-му. Росіяни прийшли звільняти мою Луганщину. Тоді я втратила свій дім вперше. Вимушено переїхала на Київщину і тут почала будувати нове життя. Дім позаду мене – це дім мого чоловіка, це його мрія. Була. Він продумав його до дрібниць, самостійно оздоблював територію, висаджував рослини. 24 лютого почалось повномасштабне вторгнення, а вже 8 березня ми залишились без дому, як і тисячі інших українців. З перших хвилин мій чоловік вирішив, що буде боронити домівку із зброєю в руках. Я також хотіла бути корисною, тому почала вести активну волонтерську діяльність. Добре пам'ятаю день, коли росіяни зруйнували наш дім, нашу мрію. Росіяни буквально винищили усе місто. Наш дім – це частина комплексу з 18 будинків. Після вторгнення не залишилось жодного. Майно, яке вціліло, російські солдати забрали з собою, покидаючи Гостомель. Коли я побачила дім, сліз не було, тільки пустота на душі та думки про зруйновану мрію коханого. Найбільше боліло за нього, та й болить і досі. Це схоже на рану, яка вже ніколи не затягнеться, а шрам залишиться зі мною назавжди.
The loss of every Ukrainian is also the loss of the state. International Register of Damage is a significant step towards the Ukraine's rebuilding. The application to the register will be submitted through the web portal or DIA app. The transparency of the service is guaranteed by 3 key points. People themselves fill in personal and properties information. Next step, adding photo and video materials confirming the damages. Information is encrypted and transmitted via a secure channel to the registry in The Hague. Olga's story is one of thousands. Reporting Russian crimes is a necessary basis for the future life of Ukrainians.
There were no tears, just emptiness in the soul. What the lady said, I think that's the experience of many thousands and millions probably in Ukraine. Also, we've seen our television on our travels working in Ukraine, also on the front lines. And in this discussion, in this conversation today, we'll try to find out what can be done to relieve this, how to help these people, and why is it important to have these initiatives, and what difference can they make. Before we start the discussion, I just would like to quote Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who said that weapons give physical protection, but it is justice that restores the sense of security. And this is what he said at the beginning of April, when the register for the damage of Ukraine, on the day when it was established and became fully operational. Let's start with Latvia, who has been deeply involved also in the creation of the register and in the process to bring justice for Ukraine. And it's Ms. Krištīne Lāce, who is currently the advisor to the President of Latvia on international law. But before, as the full-scale invasion started, she was working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and has been involved with the issues since the very beginning. Also has represented Latvia on a European Court of Human Rights and also the UN International Court of Justice. So there's great experience there. And Ms. Lisa will explain what's the Latvian position on accountability, the role of Latvia, and why are these processes important. Thank you.
Thank you, Gins. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm using the mic right so you can hear me. Big thank you to the Dutch Embassy for inviting me for this discussion, and it's unfortunate reality that the topic of Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the need to restore justice dominates our agendas. I will have three sets of comments, and I will start my first set with the unfortunate truth that Russia's aggression against Ukraine is existential threat to the rules-based international order. I'm sure you've heard this phrase, rules-based international order. It's very legal, but I find that the best comparison I can offer is traffic rules. International law between states is like traffic rules in a big city. You need some sort of order, some sort of guidelines, some sort of rules to be able to navigate from point A to point B safely. You need to be able to rely that others will also obey those rules and will stop at the red light to let you pass. So what Russia has done is blatantly disregarded and violated those rules. Russia's aggression is an attempt to revert to those ages where force could be used to change borders and to acquire territories. And that age we hoped was long in the past. So from Latvia's perspective, it unfortunately feels very familiar. And that's the reason why the Baltic states, Poland, we take very personally that which happens in Ukraine. We know exactly what it means to have your houses destroyed, your relatives deported, your relatives disappearing, being tortured. And we are absolutely adamant that this time the offender, the violator, should meet the appropriate response that it did not really meet in 1940. So that there are absolutely no doubts that this kind of behavior is never normalized and it is absolutely unacceptable. But what is very important about the international response to Russia's aggression is that how many international law instruments have been engaged and employed. In other words, it is a testament, first of all, to the skills of our Ukrainian colleagues, to Ukrainian lawyers, who know which courts to apply, which instruments to use to show that international law and these rules do offer mechanisms that can provide an avenue to act against the aggressor and the offender. And it has been from day one the purpose of all actions taken by Latvia, by other Baltic states, by European states and democratic community internationally to make sure that there is comprehensive accountability. And this is, again, is another phrase that you will hear often when the discussion turns to issues of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, the need to ensure comprehensive accountability. And that includes both the responsibility of Russia as a state, but also individual criminal responsibility for war crimes, for crimes against humanity. And it is absolutely clear that our responses must be in compliance with international law. Democracies need to defend themselves, but they need to do that with democratic means. We cannot allow ourselves to sink to the level of aggressor. So, to wrap up my first comments, Russia has violated international law, and our response to that will be based and is based on international law. My second comments will gradually turn towards the register of damages. And I will start by commenting that when we speak about the response to Russia's aggression, we often concentrate on the aggressor, how we stop it, how we bring it to justice. But unfortunately, there's other side to the story. There's the story of a victim. And as was just said by Ukrainian ambassador, we're not talking only about state as a victim. We're talking about thousands and thousands of individuals. The war is very personal. The destruction and damages are very personal, and that's the reason why there also needs to be a response at a very personal level. And that is what the Register of Damages attempts to do as a first step in the comprehensive compensation mechanism. This register is indeed the first step to document, to register the claims of those who have suffered damages, injury from Russia's aggression against Ukraine. The reason Latvia is particularly interested and feels involved in the work of the damage is that last September, while Latvia held the chairmanship in the Council of Europe Committee of Ministers, rotating chairmanship, Latvia hosted an informal meeting of the Ministers of Justice in Riga. And Ministers of Justice adopted a document called Riga Principles, which outline, which gives a guideline to the Register of Damages on the general approach in its work. And the general approach is strongly victim-centered. In other words, the victim, the person, is at the very center of the Register's work, and all the efforts of member states of the Register and the colleagues working at the Register are aimed at meeting the needs of individual victims. So the Register of Damages is very personal, very tangible, a very individual response to Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And I think it's very telling that, unlike in some other military conflicts, in this conflict, we do not need to wait for the actual hostilities to end to know which side the justice is on. And therefore, the discussions on state responsibility, on individual liability are ongoing from the first day of war. And my final points will be very brief. We do not have pink glasses when we look at the work of the Register. I'd like to think we are very clear-eyed and very aware of the many challenges that are on the way until full compensation. And there are many questions about effectiveness of the Register, whether there will be actual compensations, and my response is probably very brief. The Register and the compensation mechanisms, if they are not there, they are definitely not effective. If they are already there, then we have a chance to see real compensations and real redress for the violations and for the damages suffered. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine Leeds, advisor to the President of the Republic of Latvia. Atgādināšu, ja kāds vēlas tulkojumu latviešu valodā, ir pieejams austiņas ar tulkojumu latviešu valodā. Pie meitenēm zilajām cepurēm. The war is very personal and needs very personal responses to the victims of the war. The executive director of the Register of Damage for Ukraine, Mr. Markian Kluchkovsky, in the middle here. He was appointed the head of the register a year ago. The register itself started operation at the beginning of April. There's been where Ukrainians and also those abroad can register their claims of destroyed property, which would then be checked further down the road. I understand there's already thousands of applications. Mr. Kluchkovsky is one of the Ukrainian top lawyers, actually, in the field of international law and also dispute resolution, with about 20 years of experience. And when the full-scale invasion started, he found his way how to help Ukraine in this way. And turning back to that, the war is very personal, and that is what the Register for Damages does, responds to these personal tragedies that have happened to many Ukrainians. So can you explain how it works? What are the criteria, and how do you see the steps further down the road, the practical steps?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for organizing this panel for such an important topic. The consequences of the war are extremely difficult to measure. I think they are immeasurable, in fact. In Ukraine, there is not a single person that has been unaffected by the war. But statistics do have a value, and there's a way to look at it through the lens of numbers. For example, we have tens of thousands of people, at least tens of thousands of people, who have lost lives. The number of people who got injured because of the war is over 100,000. 47,000 people are missing. We do not know where they are and whether they are alive. 600,000 people lost a place to live, lost their apartments, lost their houses. Millions of people were displaced, had to flee their home. 3 million in Ukraine, another 5 or 6 million outside of Ukraine. We've heard from the ambassador that some of them are here in Latvia. If we want to talk about the property angle of it, the World Bank has assessed that the cost of recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine at the end of last year is $486 billion. That is just to put Ukraine as it was on the 22nd of February. This is not even accounting for the cost of the human loss that Ukraine and Ukrainians have suffered. So we lawyers always ask the question, there must be someone who is responsible for this, who must pay for this. And the answer to the question is very simple. It is Russia. It is not just me saying. This is what the UN General Assembly has said on the 14th of November 2022 when it adopted a resolution entitled Remedy and Reparation for Aggression Against Ukraine. In that resolution, in black letters, the General Assembly said Russia must be held accountable for its violations of international law in or against Ukraine. In that same resolution, the General Assembly said that there is a need for a compensation mechanism to put that responsibility of Russia into practice, a mechanism to compensate the victims of the Russian war. And in that same resolution, the General Assembly recommended the establishment of the Register of Damage that would record the claims for compensation and serve as a first step towards a compensation mechanism. That register has been created. It has been created in The Hague by 44 states under the auspices of the Council of Europe, and I have a privilege of leading its work. The mandate of the register is not to serve as a court or a tribunal. It is to create a record of damage, loss, and injury that Ukraine and Ukrainians have suffered because of the war. Our mandate is very broad. We are to include the damage, loss, and injury of all kinds. Damage to people, damage to legal entities, to the business, damage to the government. We are to include material and non-material damage, so equally loss of property and the consequences of a loss of life, injury, forced displacement, torture, sexual violence, deprivation of liberty, deportation of children, and so on and so forth. there are overall 44 categories of claims that can be recorded in the register. And as Gint said a few months ago, on the 2nd of April, we have commenced submission of claims to the register in just one category. We're starting small. For now, the owners of residential real estate, of houses and apartments that were destroyed, that were bombed by Russians, can submit claims to the register. Overall, we have a very difficult task because the number of claims is expected to be very, very large. We expect between 6 and 8 million claims. No other mechanism like that in the history has had to deal with a volume like that. If we allow a single claimant every claimant to submit even a single sheet of paper to the register with their claim, we will drown in paper. And we also have to realize that we live in the 21st century. So we go digital. We are requiring claimants to submit their claims and evidence to us digitally, in digital form, through digital means. Thankfully, Ukraine is one of the most digitized countries in the world. And we have this thing called DIA. It's a government services app that you have seen in a little reference to in a little video. It's a government services app that is used by 20 million Ukrainians. Everybody has it on their phone. It's where we have our passport, our driver's license, all other documents. And we can submit our claims through that application, through that website. We designed a system that makes it very intuitive and very simple for regular people like you and I to submit a claim without having to seek advice from a lawyer or from an IT expert. The submission of claim takes between 10 and 20 minutes. That's all that is. Of course, the claim needs to be prepared, but that's how much it takes. In the 3 months, effectively, since the beginning of our submissions process, we already have several thousand of claims submitted in that one category for damage and destruction of residential real estate. And in the next 2 months, we are opening another batch of categories, 12 more categories for different types of claims. Those will be very important ones. Claims for loss of life of a close family member, claims for a missing family member, claims for internal displacement. There will be a number of categories that relate to loss of property, including critical infrastructure. It is in everyday's headlines, the strikes that Russia is inflicting on Ukrainian power companies, power generation stations, that leaves millions of Ukrainians without power on a daily basis. These things need to be addressed. So we are confident that by the end of the year, we will open all the categories for our submission, and we will be well on our way to analyzing, assessing them, and preparing them for further stages. It is an interesting work in the sense that we will have an opportunity to use modern tools, such as artificial intelligence, to go through the millions and millions of claims. And we have an opportunity to do that in a coherent and organized way. Of course, just merely recording the claims is not enough. The Register of Damage is an important pillar of the claims mechanism, of the compensation mechanism. But to borrow a phrase from Mr. Böker, a house cannot stand on one pillar. And we need to look ahead. We need to create a body that will allow us to adjudicate the claims, to assess damage in every individual case, and to come up with a number of compensation that Russia must pay to an individual victim. Because we are focused on the victim, we are focused on the victim-centered approach. That work has started. It will take a little bit of time. Nothing like that has been done before. We do have an opponent that sits on the UN Security Council as a permanent member that is opposing this work every step of the way, but we are certain that we will get there. Again, adjudicating claims itself is not enough because there must be a source of money to pay. $486 billion in a conservative assessment is a lot of money. We need to find a way to make Russia pay. If Russia does not want to do it voluntarily, that should not stop us from looking for ways to make that happen. There are approximately $300 billion of Russian assets that are frozen in Western jurisdictions that could be a source of some of those payments. We do not have a chance, we do not have a luxury of being able to stop until we get that done, because nobody except Russia is supposed to pay for that damage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Diskusija. 6 to 8 million claims that are expected. in the millions, and almost $500 billion US, according to the current estimates. That's lots of claims, lots of damage, and as was mentioned here, we are clear-eyed on this, that there are hurdles, that there are still steps ahead. Mr. Roland Bucker has a great experience in different international organizations, also in the Council of Europe, dealing with issues like this. Hometown is The Hague. My understanding is Ministry of the Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, and also international law. And my understanding is that you are currently advising how to steer this process in the midst of all these different processes which are actually going on the fly, as was mentioned, perhaps building a plane on the fly as well. So these millions of possible claims, billions of US dollars worth of damage. How will this be insured? What are the next steps ahead?
Thank you. Thank you. It works. You, Mr. Moderator, and also the Ambassador have expressed their appreciation to the Dutch Embassy, to my colleagues here in Riga for organizing this event. I should like to add to that my appreciation and even admiration to our Latvian friends for organizing this event. It is really something I have never been to before. I believe this is a proof of the vitality of the Latvian democracy to have an event like that, like this. You must understand, guys like Markian and myself, we are wearing two-piece suits and fancy ties, and we move around in big rooms where we meet other such people. But it's rarely that let me speak for myself, I cannot speak for Markian, that we come to an event like this where families and children are interested in what's going on, where even a dog is in the audience. I can't say I've had that very often. So this is a real pleasure, but I don't want to make jokes about this. I really consider this proof of the vitality of the Latvian democracy, hence my appreciation and my admiration. Why am I sitting here as representative of the Dutch government? The Netherlands has a long tradition in building up and defending the international legal order. Why is that? I guess also because, like Latvia, we belong to, well, we're not the smallest country by no means, but we're not one of the big powers around the world, to put it mildly. And we, smaller players on Earth, we need to find other means of defending our common interest. And the Netherlands has understood from a long time ago that we needed a rules-based international order. And hence the role of The Hague, which is the city of our government, the role of The Hague in building up this international legal order. Since the end of the 19th century, we have hosted international organizations that guarantee the to maintain this international legal order. I'm talking about the International Court of Justice, I'm talking about the International Criminal Court, and now, as we all know, we are confronted with a very serious new challenge of this international legal order caused by the Russian aggression. This is why the Netherlands, from an early moment on, has decided to take a prominent role in responding, and I'm not speaking about military. This is something for many other states, and particularly also the bigger ones among us, but in the legal sense, in the humanitarian sense, in the human rights sense, to respond to the challenges that Russia poses. We call this accountability for Ukraine. This is our aim. We have a new government since this week in the Netherlands, and I'm really pleased to say that also the new government is fully committed to maintaining our role in this sense. So what are the highlights? There has already been much talk about the register of damage. We're very pleased to host this register in The Hague. I will come back briefly to it later on. But there is also a serious discussion going on which focuses rather on the criminal law approach to what happens in the war against Ukraine. After all, it's individuals who are criminally responsible who call the shots, who take the decisions. It's not for nothing that we have an international criminal court. I just mentioned it already. It is playing its role. It has issued arrest warrants against some of the key players in Moscow. But this is not the only thing. We need, of course, to support Ukraine itself to prosecute war crimes, to prosecute crimes against humanity. This is what we are doing from the Netherlands. The European Union is doing it, and many others are doing it as well. There is a gap in this whole legal response. This gap is what we call the crime of aggression. It's the mother of all crimes. It is the waging of the war as such, which is an illegal war, as we all know. People are responsible for waging this war, and these people need to be prosecuted. And this is why the Netherlands is also very much supporting the developments towards a special tribunal for the crime of aggression. But that's not what our afternoon is about. It's about compensation of damage. So I rapidly come back to that issue. In fact, Markian has already described the most important trades here. The register is there. It's up and running. It's really remarkable how quickly they have started doing their work. Within a year, they have become up and running. For some people, this may still sound very long, but let me assure you, in international law, this is the speed of light. It is really, really very fast. They are still developing, as Markian has explained, but what has been achieved so far is already impressive, and we're really proud to host the Register of Damage. We also know that registering claims can never be the end. It's important, it's indispensable, you need it, but it's not the end, because a registration is not what the people who have suffered the damage are looking for. They're looking for compensation. So the next step is to create a new body which can assess these claims and which can eventually sift out claims that possibly have no relation with the war, if there are any such claims, or anything else, and they can decide which claims are ready for compensation and which ones are not. So that's the second step, and we are in the middle of starting the process to reach that second step. It's going to take some time, of course, but you have to begin somewhere. And I'm quite confident that we will be able to complete this step. And then the third and last one, and probably the most complicated, is the question, so who's going to pay for it? Well, we know the answer to that. It's the Russian Federation. By international law, they are quite simply responsible for restoring the damage done by their illegal acts. But saying that and knowing that is one thing, but to make it real is much more difficult. So this discussion about a fund, a compensation fund, which will be the third pillar of the house, we call the House a compensation mechanism, that's going to be the most difficult one. But I can assure you of the commitment of the Dutch government to complete this work, and we will remain involved in it. I think this is enough from my side for the time being, and I'm, of course, happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Mr. Becker, thank you for sketching out the future steps, the 3 pillars for this process to be whole and to work. Es tikai atgādināšu, ja kāds vēlas klausīties latviešu valodā, pie meitenēm zilajās cepurēs pieejams auftiņas, kur ir tulkojums latviski. Those who want to ask the questions, there's a Slido option, both watching on the internet and here. They would pop up here for me and for us to ask to the panelists. And also, if there are any remarks from the public, you can just raise your hand or questions. My understanding is that currently, the first pillar is established, the register, and different categories are being. There's more and more categories where you can apply for compensations. The next step, the next pillar is the body to assess the claims, and then, as you mentioned, the most complicated would be the compensation mechanism itself. And you mentioned that in international relations there was the traffic rules, and that rules-based international order, which is important for us. And Russia, of course, would be responsible for paying those compensations, but at the moment it seems unlikely that it would do that, also in the foreseeable future. In the interim, the fund, what is it, how could it work as an interim option if we cannot see that Russia would actually compensate those claims in foreseeable future?
Yep. Thank you. This is really the most important question, ultimately, because all that makes quite little sense if we cannot assure that the victims are actually compensated. We are acutely aware that compensation cannot restore the victims fully. You can never return the lives of those who had been killed, for example, but this is a very important part. Whether Russia agrees to pay or not is really not a factor in what we do, because Russia must. That it's duty under international law. And whether it's in a year, in 5 years, or in 10 years, I'm sure there will be a point where the conditions will be such that Russia says, okay, enough with that. Let's try to re-engage with the world. Let's try to resume trading with the world. Let's try to regain access to capital markets in the world. All that is impossible as long as Russia has a debt worth of $500 billion out there for the damage that it is doing in Ukraine. So this is really, like I said, not a factor, but it may take time. In the meantime, like I said, it's a question of the possibility to use the 300 billion of frozen assets that are out there, that belong to the very entity that has engaged in this war. And there is no reason why this money should not be used to compensate Ukrainians. Of course, there are legal issues, there are political issues related to whether that is allowed, whether that will create a dangerous precedent. But a much more dangerous precedent is if a state can initiate a war of aggression and then face no consequences of that. That is really a precedent that we should try to avoid. So while the 300 billion is not enough, it's a good start, and we should try to work towards that.
Sorry, can I add for the context? Roland rightly mentioned that international law develops slowly. It evolves slowly. But as an international law lawyer, the last 2 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine has seen unprecedented speeds at which international law has developed. Never before we saw the amount of sanctions imposed by European Union. Never before we had such quick realization that there needs to be an ad hoc international tribunal for the crime of aggression. And if at the beginning of the war we were talking in terms of whether there should be an international tribunal for the crime of aggression, very quickly we arrived at the stage where we're discussing how to establish and what kind of tribunal. So the ability of international community to come up with creative solutions and be very creative and brave in finding the solutions gives me hope that also for the functioning of Register of Damages and Claims Commission and Compensation Fund, there will be solutions. And I think the best example of this creative approach is the discussion in the European Union that the funds from the frozen assets, the proceeds generated by those funds could be used to assist Ukraine. If you ask an international lawyer 5 years ago, can you touch the sovereign assets, the funds of another state sitting in your banks, you would get an immediate response, no. That's an absolute no, and that's an absolute axiom of international law. Since then, that approach has changed. So I'm confident that there is this creative ability to find ways to respond to these challenges as well. Thank you.
The speed of light, as Mr. Becker said, in terms of international law.
Yes, and thank you, Christine, for echoing that, and I can in turn echoing what you just said. Just one very, very brief comment. When I talk to friends or relatives about the work we do, the response is quite often one of, what's it all good for? Do you really expect Russia to change its policy? And my answer is always, do we have a choice? I don't think we have a choice. We have to do this work. Assume that one day, in whatever future, distant or not, there will be an opening in the Russian politics. And we haven't prepared for that. We haven't done all this work. We haven't registered the claims. We haven't built up criminal cases against those responsible. Then what? Then you're in big trouble. So we just need to do this. Whether it stands a chance of being fulfilled at short notice or not. So this is really the only thing I wanted to add at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. We have some questions on the Slido from the viewers here. I would divide these in two. The first one is about the submission of the claims, and do only those with Ukrainian nationality can do that?
So for submission of claims, there are only 3 criteria that are required. The claim must be in relation to damage that has occurred in the territory of Ukraine, including the territories that are under temporary occupation. Second is that the claim must be in relation to damage that has occurred on or after 24th February 2022. And the third is that the claim must be for damage that was caused by the Russian aggression. There is no nationality requirement. So a national of any state that can submit such a claim as long as that claim ticks the 3 boxes, the 3 eligibility criteria. Same applies to legal entities. It does not necessarily have to be a Ukrainian business, a Ukrainian legal entity, as long as these boxes are ticked.
Thank you. There are 2 more questions. Another one. We're going to go one by one. I'm going to put the next 2 in one. There's a question about how to evaluate the amount of compensation in concrete numbers. There are estimations of $486 billion US. And I imagine that's about, how much does the building costs and things like that. But there's another question, and I think that deals with the next categories that are going to be open quite soon to claim compensations or damages for. And that's a question, how will non-physical claims be compensated, and how to put a price on someone's life?
you cannot put a price on someone's life. That's a problem not only just in the symbolism of the words, but in a very practical sense, because this is always a difficult part of the work of these claims commissions or mechanisms, because they require to make that assessment in some sort of a pragmatic way, and an assessment that would apply to all the lives that had been lost, because you cannot place value of one life over the value of the other life, even though there are different circumstances, different events, and so on and so forth. In terms of dry practice, it's a matter of a mix of expert evaluation and a political decision to have effectively a number assigned, as cynically as it sounds, to a loss of life, and then process the claims on that basis. Same applies to other non-physical claims, including serious injury, including torture, including other sorts of suffering that cannot be assessed like property. So these are difficult decisions that this mechanism will have to take.
Anything to add at this moment? Before we turn to the questions on the Slido here, there's more of them, and maybe also in the context of what we just talked. My understanding is that, well, there's been comparisons that what's happening now with the register for the damage for Ukraine and further pillars, it's like building a plane on the fly. However, are there any other examples in the past in terms of compensation reparations like this, where you can draw experience from that, and how did that work? Anybody? Who picks the mic first?
I can start. There are examples, because unfortunately and tragically this is not the first war. It may be one of the biggest since 1945. And for that reason, all the examples are applicable to only to a certain extent. Perhaps the best one is the establishment of a so-called UN Compensation Commission that was created in 1991 to respond to the consequences of invasion of Iraq into Kuwait. That Claims Commission has processed more than 2 million claims, has adopted some of them, rejected others, and has ordered aggregate payout of $52 billion. And that commission has worked for 31 years. It ironically concluded its work just a week before Russia invaded into Ukraine. Why that commission is important? Because it set organizational blueprint of how to deal with these mass claims programs in the context of a big state-to-state war. We have certain advantages compared to UNCC. We come 31 years or 32 years later. We have technology in our hands that UNCC didn't have in the early 90s. So we hope to be able to accomplish our mandate faster than 31 years, even though others will also be measured in years and not less.
I have really nothing to add on this particular issue, but I'd like to extend your question to another subject that I mentioned before, and that's the criminal law response to the violations of international law. And there, of course, we have a wealth of precedents. We have had various kinds of international tribunals. I mean, the International Criminal Court is the best example, but we have had ad hoc tribunals as well. The difficulty in this case is that we cannot count on the most essential body which exists in the world, which is the United Nations Security Council. This is normally the body that you look at if you want to create a criminal law response to violations of international law. But we all know that the Russian Federation is a member of the Security Council. It's a permanent member. It has the right to veto. So we cannot count on that system, which would be the normally would be the preferred response. It means that we need to search for other ways and means. You cannot just create a tribunal out of thin air. You need legitimacy. You need to have standing under international law. Otherwise, the whole exercise will be idle. And this is exactly. I will not go into details, also because it's not the focus of our discussion. But I just wanted to mention this, just to paint the whole picture. Thank you.
Mr. Becker, thank you. There are more questions on the Slido. Let's start with one question or remark from the audience. There's going to be coming a blue cube where you can speak into. Vienlaiks, kamēr es mikrofonu atgādināšu, ka tie, kas vēlas klausīties latviešu valodā, itanēm zilajos cepurēs ir austiņas, kurās ir tulkojums latviski. Es saprotu, viņas ir augšā, bet varbūt var pacelt roku un pamāt viņām, ja kādam nepieciešams. Please.
Thank you very much for the informative discussion. This has been highly legalistic. I want to ask a more political question. Can you tell us the ways in which Russia has tried to undermine, hinder, or delegitimize the creation and work of the register?
Thank you, Mr. Mruznieks. Who picks the first?
I think they've been trying to do that every day in various ways, some that we see, some that we do not see. But one really good example is actually very recent. One of the officials, top Russian officials, Mr. Medvedev, speaking at a St. Petersburg Economic Forum or something like that, said that, but Russia is also creating a register of damage for those who have suffered as a consequence of sanctions. To which we say, imitation is the best form of flattery. But this is, in their eyes, we believe that this is what they're trying to do, that everybody can establish a register of damage and do whatever they want, undermining this concept of legitimacy that Roland has talked about. So for us, it is very important to have this foundation of legitimacy to push back against these efforts. So we have 94 states that had supported the General Assembly resolution 2 years ago, recommending the establishment of the Register of Damage. And we have 44 that are actually members, founding members of the Register of Damage, and are supporting our work. So this is a coalition that Russia will never be able to create around its crazy idea, even though it has a very similar name, Register of Damage. And we expect things like that every step of the way. We understand who we are dealing with. We understand that this is not just going to be a political issue. This is also going to be a legal issue, technical issue, security issue. We will not be the first international organization in The Hague who has felt the effect of Russia's efforts to undermine and subvert their activities. We are prepared for that.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience? There's one. And then we're going to move to Slido. Wait for the blue cube. Yes, it's an. Hold it close to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for this very important discussion and the great work that you're doing. One thing I'm wondering is that if someone hands in information, for example, about, let's say, take the most horrific thing, that a family member has died because of war actions, and this person starts to hand in details about the situation, is this information in some way also usable later on in a criminal case against the aggressors, or will that be, will that be one of the effects of the registry, or do you, are these two separate things, and does it only focus on financial compensation based on this information?
Thanks. So these mechanisms are separate, indeed. So there's no overlap between them. But there is cooperation between these mechanisms. It has many different forms. One is in terms of sharing information at the level of at the beginning. So when somebody comes to us with information, we can say, oh, don't forget to also go there and share that information there because they can use it in a different way. Then in certain scenarios, we can share that information directly. We have to be very careful about that because we have to be careful about personal data and data protection and secrecy and security of these issues, because in the end of the day, people are sharing very, very sensitive information. So we have to be very careful about that. And it's a two-way street because we're getting a lot of information, a lot of evidence from these other, particularly law enforcement organizations that are doing a lot of work on the ground collecting evidence. So this is quite truly an ecosystem of accountability mechanisms, and we are establishing relations with one another to make sure that there are no gaps and no information sort of goes down the drain, so to speak.
Thank you. There are more questions dropping into Slido. There was one question which I don't see it anymore on the Slido, but it was a question addressed to Christine Lice, advisor to the President of the Republic of Latvia, about our own experience of 50 years of occupation of Moscow, and can there be drawn any experience regarding accountability, any lessons learned?
Yes, the lesson actually is very clear. Impunity causes repetition, as simple as that. And the occupation of the Baltic states did not bring about the accountability it had to bring. So it left a feeling that it's something that other states would tolerate. And that is one of the reasons why Latvia and other Baltic states have been so at the forefront of making sure that does not happen with Ukraine. That's the reason why, for example, Latvia was the first state to intervene as a third party in the International Court of Justice case. We were among the first to join the case against Russia in the European Court of Human Rights. We supported the application and the referral to the International Criminal Court. So we try to make sure that there's no repetition of what happened to the Baltic states, and that it took 50 years to remedy. And it still hasn't been remedied to the extent we hope it will be remedied in case of Ukraine. Because in the Baltic states, there was never a compensation system. There was never an international body comparable to the register acknowledging the individual suffering, the individual injuries. And that is also part of the importance of the register, that it's an international body that acknowledges the individual suffering. So to recapitulate, our experience has taught us to make sure that the crime meets the punishment. And the register of damages, the discussion about the tribunal, those are the swords of Damocles that should hang above Russia, to remind on a daily basis that this crime will meet its punishment.
Thank you. There's more questions pouring in. There was a question a bit before about compensation to those who are in the occupied territories. I would like to add also another layer to this question. This compensation mechanism, which is due to still be created, but the register for the damages, it works from those damages caused from 24th of February 2022. Ukraine has always said, also here in the Baltics, we say that the war's been going on for 10 years, since 2014. And so some might have questioned why does it only happening? Why can you only submit claims from 2022 and not before that? And we've personally encountered on our travels in Ukraine a couple of weeks before the full-scale invasion. For example, in Kharkiv, we went to a suburb of Kharkiv where there was I think German-funded kind of a housing built for those for IDPs who had property back in Luhansk Oblast, which they cannot access anymore because they couldn't do that already before. So what happens with those claims and those being in occupied territory? So basically it's 3 questions. Sorry about that one.
This is a point where we do feel a little bit of unfairness. But that unfairness stems from the fact that the actions of Russia and the events from 2014 until 2022 were not considered by the international community as an act of aggression. They were thought to be illegal, they were condemned, but they were not considered to be an act of aggression. And an act of aggression, the war of aggression that started on the 24th of February 2022 is what changed everything, because then the international community, the states, looked at it differently and condemned it as an act of aggression. So from a purely legal perspective, the events pre-2022 and after, they are in a different legal reality, let's say legal circumstances. And it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to put them all together under the same roof of the register of damage. So we do feel that degree of unfairness. We feel that sentiment from the people, for example, those who had lost property, who were displaced, because these are the same violations committed by the same entities, and yet the consequences are different. But again, there are legal constraints that we just have to deal with that are reflected in the statute of the register as eligibility criteria. And on the broader question of compensation for people in the occupied territories, there is no formal obstacle to it. In fact, our approach to receive all the claims digitally makes it possible for them to submit these claims, because there is no office, there's no agency, there's no building you have to physically travel to submit a claim. You do not even have to use the mail service. You just go online, you go on a DIA website, which will always recognize Ukrainian citizens as Ukrainian citizens, and you can submit a claim there. There will be practical issues, of course, related to that, because not everybody has access to the same amount of information, not everybody has access to the same amount of government service, but these are practical issues that we hope we will be able to resolve. But in principle, every Ukrainian, everyone who has suffered through that war has an ability to submit a claim.
I'd like to add one aspect to this in answering your question. Markian rightfully spoke about different realities between the period before the 24th of February and the period after. That's absolutely true. But one aspect here is that before the 24th of February, there was at least one other means for citizens who were confronted with Russian violations to try and to get justice, because Russia at that time was still connected to the European Convention on Human Rights. I'm not saying that necessarily all claims will be based on human rights violations, but I would imagine that in most cases this will be the situation. So in principle, those who have suffered human rights violations before, and the date to be exact is the 16th of September 2022. This is the date on which Russia got out of the system of the European Convention on Human Rights. But anything dating from before that, subject to the usual admissibility criteria and so on and so forth, can be received by the European Court of Human Rights. And in fact, they have a large number of such claims pending, and they may end in just satisfaction, which one might call compensation of damage. Legally speaking, it's maybe not exactly the same, but it goes a long way in that direction. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from the audience present here on the front row. Atgādināšu, kāds vēlas klausīties latviski, ir pieejams austiņas augšā.
Thank you. Sorry, the dog's barking. My name's Dinah. I've worked in human rights for over 15 years, and a key challenge in the human rights kind of sphere is that a lot of the international mechanisms are not accessible to individuals or known about. The European Court of Human Rights being an exception. So it's wonderful to hear of a mechanism that is accessible to individuals. My question is a practical one. What is your communication strategy? How are you making sure that people hear about this and are able to access it? I'm also thinking about people that are in more remote regions, also taking into consideration electricity blackouts and things like that. How are we making sure that people know that this is available to them? Thank you.
This is really one of the keys of our job, to make that happen, because even the best designed register is meaningless if people don't know about it and don't know how to use it. There is no simple answer to that, because the approach has to be comprehensive, complicated, reach a lot of different people in a lot of different places in a lot of different countries. So it has to use a number of different tools. First of all, I mean, just to get this out of the way, our own communication using our website, our social media, that will hopefully be amplified by news reporters, news agencies, and taken across, including the use of modern things. I mean, in Ukraine, there's no better way to spread information than to make a viral post in Telegram, for example, so why not use that? But on a more serious note, on a more comprehensive note, this is also impossible without cooperation with other stakeholders that work in that field. That is, first of all, Ukrainian authorities, who are everywhere in Ukraine and work on that. Second, international organizations that have mandates to work in Ukraine on these things. And third, and clearly not the least, civil society organizations. There are many of them. They're extremely active. They're extremely productive. If I can take a cynical note, they're well-funded these days when it comes to Ukraine, and they can help. They can take the word. So, for example, one of the recent developments that we did was the event that we did in Kiev with the Council of Europe's Congress of Local and Regional Authorities, that had an event in Kiev with the Association of Ukrainian Towns and Cities. Where the register was brought up, discussed, and then these associations will take that information into their municipalities, talking to people and spreading the word. So we want to do that for every community, for every municipality, every field, every aspect of the work. We also have to work with other states, because there are 6 million Ukrainians living that had to flee abroad, that are living abroad. So we want to work with, for example, Latvian government and other governments to help spread the word through Ukrainian communities, through municipalities where Ukrainians live, to inform them about the register, about how it works, how to use it, why to use it. Because this is... we will never be able to attract people and motivate them to submit claims unless we have three things: awareness, ability, and belief. Awareness is what your question is about. They need to know about it. Ability is that they have means and accessible means to submit a claim. And the belief, they need to understand why they're doing that and why should they bother. So all these, without these three aspects, that will not be successful. So we're working on that very hard.
Okay. There's more questions from the Slido, and I wanted to ask a question as well. There's a question about international tribunal, and if you need agreement of the perpetrator or not to create that. But also about, there's been ICC's warrants against Putin and other high-standing officials of Russia. So there's state responsibility, there's individual responsibility. All these different processes happening right now, warrants and register of damage in parallel against Russia. How do they, work in a broader context right now? Maybe I can ask to comment, Mr. Booker and Christina, perhaps.
Well, the first part of the answer to your question, and I have been wanting to say this before in response to other questions, the variety of organizations that we have makes us in the Netherlands convinced that we are doing right by offering hospitality to new organizations. We believe it's efficient to have these organizations in one location, and that's why, or that's at least one argument why my government has already offered not only to host a register of damage, but also everything that happens afterwards towards a compensation mechanism, and also a possible special tribunal. I see the question on the screen, can an international tribunal be created without the agreement of Russia? I already earlier on referred to the preference, the strong preference that we should all have, and that we have at least, for having the route through the Security Council. But that route is blocked for obvious reasons. And my answer to the question is definitely yes. The Security Council would be the preference, but if that fails, it's not the only way. What you need is legitimacy. Legitimacy is key. And how do you create that? You create that by having as much support from the international community as possible, even realizing that the key state in this regard, and that is the state from where the perpetrators, where most of the perpetrators come from, does not cooperate. So we cannot simply sit back and relax simply because the Security Council isn't able to open what would normally be the preferred route. So from my side, a resounding yes to that question.
It's a yes from me as well, not least because already on the 2nd of March of 2022, the UN General Assembly, with very large majority, adopted a resolution defining the act of Russia as an act of aggression. So unlike in many other military conflicts, here we already have a finding of a universal body that this has been an act of aggression, which is absolutely illegal in international law. So this is a very important element in the discussions on the International Tribunal, that we already have a finding by the UN qualifying the act of Russia. The second part of the question about making sure that all the international organizations work together, not overlap and don't leave gaps. Several tools to ensure that, from personal contacts among the government's representatives, and the law of international law is not as big as it sounds. Very many of us know each other. We meet in same international organizations, so that's part of it. And second, there are institutional arrangements between international organizations to coordinate their work, especially on investigation of war crimes and crimes against humanity, the International Center for Documentation of War Crimes within the European Union, the Joint Investigation Team. So there are personal and institutional tools to make sure that we are aware of what the other organization is doing, and to make sure that we don't run counter each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? If not, just a couple of comments. How to reach elderly people. My understanding, you already talked about that within the communities, and things like that, and you know, motivating people as well.
Yeah, so on just another aspect of reaching, I wouldn't say just elderly people, but those who do not want or cannot for some reason use DIA, is that we have created a parallel system of submission of claims through what is known in Ukraine as the Centers of Provision of Administrative Services. These are, again, agencies that are located in every little town in Ukraine that person can go to, and they will help them submit a claim. We're also mobilizing a state-funded system of legal advisors lawyers to help people submit their claims if that is needed. So really, when we say we want to make it accessible, we want to make it accessible to the fullest, that every single person, regardless of limitations, should be able to submit a claim.
We have about 5 minutes left here. I would like to ask a question about your assessment of the current affairs. Maybe it's within some international law aspects, but also international political aspects. It's been over 2 years since the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine. We just recently had the first large-scale, or as large as possible scale, Summit for Peace in Ukraine in Switzerland. There are elections going on right now in Europe. There's France this week, UK just yesterday, United States later this fall. And Ambassador of Ukraine here said during his remarks that we need to keep the pace in support of Ukraine. How do you see the way forward at this point in time, in the coming months or year?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right, and you didn't even mention what is happening in the Middle East, which, of course, detracts much of the attention of the international community. So times are indeed not easy for progressing in the field of international law. So all I can say in answer to your question, I am really pleased that even with the new government that we have, we remain committed to continuing on the path that we had embarked on. And we are very pleased to see that we still, when meetings are organized in the direction of a compensation mechanism and other meetings, like the one that we had, a ministerial meeting on the 2nd of April in The Hague, we are pleased to see that the response is still substantial, that there are still many states which see the importance of progressing in this field. But it's not a given, so we simply need to continue to reach out also to states who are hesitant, or to states who feel that on a global scale double standards apply. This is something which is frequently heard, and it's something that we need to talk about, and we do that, and we will continue to do that.
It was said during this discussion that we do not have the luxury to get tired, and I can only echo that sentiment. I also hope that as many people as possible will take very personally what is happening in their countries and what is happening in the world, because what's happening in Ukraine does affect the whole world, since it is an attempt by Russia to destroy the rules that ensure the survival of all states. So there are no other options other than continue to do what we do, continue the outreach, continue explaining to states that are physically further away from this region, from Ukraine, than what's happening there is of global importance. And I can only repeat that we do not have a luxury to get tired and to claim that there's a war fatigue, and this needs to be resolved in any other way than full victory by Ukraine. Thank you.
Unlike my co-panelists, I'm not a government representative, so maybe I will give a less political and more legal answer. The current system of international law is something that was not just given to us. It was a product of hard work that came at a price of a world war in 1945. That system is by far not perfect, but that system has worked for 80 years and has withstood a lot of different challenges throughout the years. Now that system, the very foundation of that system, is under attack. Because if a state can redraw the country's borders without feeling massive consequences, then the entire system collapses. So we have to do everything that is in our power, everything in our hands, to prevent that from happening. Because when that system collapses, if that system collapses, the outcomes are very difficult to imagine, and they will certainly be far, far beyond the borders of Ukraine. So the values of international law are what's at stake, and the principles of international law is what's at stake. Therefore, we should do everything we can to uphold them. Thank you.
Thank you. Our time has come to an end. 1 second left. The international rules-based system is under attack. We have to keep working, and there's no luxury of getting tired. Here, thank you for the panelists here. Mr. Markirian Kluczkowski, Executive Director of the Register for the Damage of Ukraine. Ms. Kristīna Līce, Advisor to the President of Latvia, and Mr. Roland Bucker from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Netherlands. Thank you for the discussion, for the input, for your thoughts, and thank you also for you being here, and here in Cēsis and also at your screens at home. Thank you.